The unfortunate part about today's seminar is there's no written backup for you to go read. I'm doing this on the fly. I did sketch out some notes for what I want to accomplish, that kind of go over the different tools. And I made a list that I'm going to follow when we take the movement apart, because there's different questions that you should be asking yourself as we go along, and different little tests you can do to perfect your skills and to find out to what state the movement is in. So nothing fancy about it, but it's my very first one, either a watch or a clock that I ever purchased. So I really enjoy it. And I'm going to show you another one. This is strictly for Lori. I'm going to show her my
oh my goodness,
my treasure pocket watch. This is a solid 18 karat gold pocket watch, early 1800s. Has a double back. You're quite a fancy. That sticker is just my code number, and the serial number is 221,000. It's at least a 15 joule, but it's a beautiful. I was fortunate. I've had it for a few years now, and when the price of gold was down, I bought it from a friend of mine for the actual melt value of gold. You have to use the key. This is the key that I have for it. It's quite a nice key, but it's not 18 karat gold. And a chain, a triple link chain. So to set the time, you have to use the wrench to turn the hands. Kind of a neat. I'll just flip it open here so you can see. Yeah.
Wendell?
It's all jeweled, like you can see the jewels. It's a beautiful, and they have this really neat. It does run. I didn't wind it up. It's a fusee. If you look inside, you can see the fusee, the chain, and they have this really nice dust cover that locks in place. Today we're gonna. This is the pocket watch. It's a damaged case. Somebody tried to solder, do weird things to it. This is the inside of it. It sort of runs and sort of doesn't run, but we're going to take it apart and look inside. So, okay, so I'll give you my little spiel before I start. So we're going to look at this Elgin. It's a 16 size pocket watch. We're going to strip it down fairly well. Now, I don't consider myself to be an expert on pocket watches. I can do a lot of basic repairs, like balance staffs. I don't really make balance staffs. I buy them and put them in. But of late, I haven't been doing a lot of work on pocket watches. Just sometimes if I buy one for a few dollars at an antique shop, there's a few checks that I do, which we're going to go over, to verify that the expensive parts of it are still functioning. So a lot of times it's dirt that does a pocket watch in, and they're fairly easy to take apart and clean if you follow some of the basic steps. So what we want to do first, you have to decide how to get the pocket watch apart. So we're going to quickly go through some different types of cases because they're not all easy. So the first type of case, like this is a very old case. It's called a pair case because it's in two pieces. It's a PAIR, and it's solid silver. So this is the movement. So it now, there's no screw on back or anything. There's the winding hole. So there's actually a little clip on these, and you snap them open. So this is the movement inside. So they're a bit of a challenge to get out if you don't know the secrets, and they're usually held in place by pins, the movement. So the number 2 style case that you're going to deal with, now this is a railroad grade pocket watch. It's a Waltham. It's a Crescent Street. It just has a straight screw on back, the easiest kind to open up. And if you look, there's 2 screws. There's a screw here and a screw here that holds in the case. So we're going to get into that deeper, but that's the simplest and the most dust-free type of case is a screw on back. Most of your expensive, just be careful with the thread because they should thread on fairly easy. So that's just a basic, has a screw on face, a screw on back. Now this is another old style. As you can see, there's no, you look for lines, there's no lines. So you notice there's no screw on back or a snap on back. So you screw off the front. And the first thing you'll notice is a hinge. So that hinge, so this is a flip out. And before you can deal with the flip out, you have to pull the stem out. Always pull the stem out. So then this actually will flip out. So that's how you get at that particular movement. And then there's the 2 screws that hold it in place. So that's a flip out case. And when you go to close it back up, just kind of play with that lever to make sure it seats, because it's a square pin going in a square hole. So it takes a bit to, so those are another style case to get at. See, like first thing I see a gap, because some of these threads have been abused. So sometimes I'll screw it backwards a little bit until I hear the snap, and then I can screw it on. It's just a little trick. So that's the flip out ones. Now, let's quickly look at these 2 cases. You see the stem on this one is at a 12. That's called an open face. And you see this one, it's front and back. You don't know which is which. But if you press the stem, so what you're doing when you're pressing the stem in these cases, you see this, you see that steel piece, the piece right here will move in and out. And a lot of people, and if you look at the top, you'll see the damage because it's cut into it. People closing it, you always press that pin opening and closing. Never pry it, because the case is part gold, so it wears very easy. So you don't want to wear it, because eventually that because it's a knife edge on the top of that clasp, it will cut into the gold, and the case there, you can see an angle where it's actually worn. It will cut in and the case won't stay closed. So this is called a hunter case. The unique part about these is that the winding stem is at the 3 o'clock. Very, very large percentage of pocket watches in a hunter case wound at 3. Now, you will find some that have an open face that wind at 3, and it's more than likely those were recased. You never know the story about these watches. You know, they're over 100 years old, so there's a lot of stuff happened to them. Now, this particular one, you'll see a lever down here. If you pull that lever out, that's a lever set. Because when you're winding this watch, you're turning the stem, and it doesn't pull out because it's got the clasp. And if they had it so it pulled out, because usually in a pocket watch, like for instance this one, you wind it in this position and you pull it out to set the time. Now, if it was a railroad type watch and you pulled it out by mistake and you went, your time would be off. So all railroad grade watches were lever set. This is called lever set when it has the lever. So you're going to see the mechanism in this one that we're going to tear apart. There's a double ratchet gear. So that's a hunter case. And they usually have a double back. And you'll see there's if it's a snap case, there's always a notch where you fit your sharp tool in to pop them open. Now, this is a jewel, which we're going to talk about jewels later, but that's a hunter case watch. Now, this is a small Swiss-made pocket watch at Heavens. It has another style case. If you look at the bottom, first thing you'll notice a hinge. So the hinge tells you something. It tells you that the back isn't going to screw off. And again, if you look closely, like I'm wearing a head magnifier now. You always do when you're working at pocket watches. And on the side, right there, you'll see the place where you stick your sharp. So the back it's what's called a snapback, but it's on a hinge. Now, where a lot of people get into trouble with pocket watches, you see that hinge doesn't open to a full 90 degrees. Now, if you try to pry that back, you'll bow the hinge, and then the case will never work properly. And that's a common problem you'll see in a lot of cases. This is a nice little pocket watch. It's Swiss made. I'm just looking for how many jewels. It's a 17 jewel. Again, I write that in the back. It's a size 10, and I write down the serial number. And the P44 is just my code number. So that's a snap-on back. Here's something else to notice. Now, this, when you look at it, you see the big lever, so you know that flips open. And something about this one, you'll see a notch here in this case, but there's no lever. So I would bet this pocket watch was recased at some point, because this case was made up for a lever set watch, but there is no lever. And the back has the same affair. You can pop it open, and if you look, you'll see the notch. Now, this one I had open, and if we look at this one, this is a real basic, simple 7 jewel, and we're going to talk about that. So if you want to start a pocket watch, I always rotate them, because shaking them up and down doesn't do anything, and that gets the balance started. Some of these they all run, but they could be dirty. The other thing you'll notice about this pocket watch, you see the face is yellow. Now, if I go back to this pocket watch, you see the glass is quite thick. This is an original style glass. Oh, they call them crystals. It's very thick, doesn't yellow. This would be a modern replacement, and they do yellow over time. Probably, I would say, once they get into the 30s, 40s, 50s, people had these crystals. Like I have a bunch of the plastic crystals. They're very easy to put in, but they don't look anywhere near the quality that. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, this is quite a small pocket watch. And when I look at it, I identify this as a woman's pocket watch. It has a loop here for the chain to hang around the woman's neck. And this is a size 0, 15 jewel. And if we look at it, now I didn't press the button to open it because it, well, actually you can see here's the problem you get into. You see that that's closed, but you see the gap around it. Somebody tried to pry that open way too far. You see how far that hinge opens up? So the back is actually buckled and the clasp no longer catches properly. Plus, there's an awful lot of wear you can see up at the top. It's a cute little, so it would hang upside down. And then when you pick it up to look at it, you'd be picking it up this way and you could actually see it's the smaller the watch, the more challenging to repair because the parts get smaller. This is the last one. This is what's called a dollar watch, made by West. This is a West Clock Dax. Very, very light. There's nothing about it that spells quality. You look inside. It was never made to service. The plates are riveted together. You know, they call them a dollar watch because they sold for $1. They're somewhat collectible today. Like I usually pay anywhere from $15, $20 for one that still works. Another point, these snap-on backs, if you grab it with your fingers in the middle like that, guess what you're going to do? You're going to crush the crystal or crush the back. You always squeeze it around the outside when you're snapping the back on. Never put any pressure on the front of the crystal. And there should be a place. Let me look closely here. No, they didn't put an indent even in it. So, but there's like I have 4 or 5 of these dollar watches. I'll play with that after. So, so let's kind of have a quick look. So this is dirt cheap pocket watch. This style of movement, which is strictly a 7 joule, is the next grade of watch. A pocket watch really can't have less than 7 joules unless you're into the dollar watch, and it may only have a couple joules or no joules. So then you got the 7 joule, and then you get into the Cadillac of pocket watches. Now this is much later. I think this is the 20s or 30s. This is a Waltham Vanguard. It's a 23 joule. You can see all the real nice jewels, very clean looking. Some of the old pocket watches had a lot of scrolling and whatnot. And the other thing that you'll get in the more expensive pocket watches you get into a much more expensive regulator. This has a little screw that you can do very fine adjustments. Now, if we look at, and anytime you're working at pocket watches, always do it over a table or somewhere that it can't fall. Never hand a pocket watch to somebody unless you're doing it over a table, because if they drop it, you're gonna bust the balance. So that's the different style cases that you're gonna get into. So let's look at the quickly at the tools. Time's flying here. So we got this opener. It has a very sharp edge. You can use like a pocket knife or something, but this is actually made for, you have some lee reach, but I filed it much sharper than what it's flat on one side and angled. This is a set of hand pullers. You're going to need a movement holder. They come in various different shapes and sizes. This is a balance tack, which you'll see us using it. You should have a loop. This is a 5 power and a 10 power for looking at fine stuff. This is a measuring tool for measuring the size of pocket watches. Pocket watches come in all different sizes. And to measure the size of a pocket watch, you need to get at the face. So there's the European, the Swiss system, which is in LIGNES, Lignes or Linges or whatever. So if you measure it that way, it's it looks like it's about 18 and a half, 19, but the American movement sizes. So if you measure across that, so it comes up to a 16. So that's a size 16, the movement. The cases vary, but the movement in this one is a size 16 movement. So that's a nice feature to have. A fine brush is nice to have, and you'll see what we do that with later. And these are letdown keys, different size ends for letting down the power, the spring power in a pocket watch. And a good set of tweezers. This is my favorite pocket watch tweezers. A demagnetizer is almost a must. An air blower is almost a must. And you need pocket watch. This is special pocket watch oil. And you see I'm doing it on a soft pad. And I've got these, I use these Kim wipes. They're dust-free, lint-free, static-free wipes. So I've got one laying down here that I can work on. And there's different books on pocket watches. So now we're ready to attack the pocket watch. This one is a little bit more challenging because it doesn't have a complete case. So I think to protect ourselves, before I do anything, I'm going to pop the hands off. Now this pocket watch is still running. And for these first few operations, I always leave power in the pocket watch because until we pull the movement out, you can't get rid of the power anyway. So this, you can see when I grab a hold of it, it squeezes. So we're actually going to, now, some of these ways may not be the approved high-tech ways, but it's the way I do it, and you'll evolve into your own way of doing it. Now, sometimes to protect the face, you can use different, but I'm going to get rid of that second hand before. They're usually not on there very hard. So I've picked off. So usually what I do is I take the cover and that's what I put the hands in. So there's the second hand. It's just a friction fit. So the next thing, now you can either use, you can use a couple levers if you like. You can put this plastic, because you don't want to damage the porcelain face. So you see the plastic on there, and you can pry them off very gently. But I use this here neat little tool. I have to get down close. And it grabs a hold of it. Now the second hand isn't indexed in any way. You can see it, that it actually has a notch in it and it just fits down over a stud. And the hour hand, now this particular thing actually has plastic pads on it so it won't mark the face. So you have to be very gentle, very careful. So again, it's just a round hole fits over the hour. So now we can't damage the hands. You'll find pocket watch hands, some people think the minute hand is bent. It actually has, if I can get it, you'll see it's curved down because it's longer than the hour hand, and it actually curves down because the glass on the outside curves. So the end of the minute hand always has a curve down towards the dial. So I'm just going to set that to the side. So now we have, I can't bend the hand. So if I had to, I've got it on a pad. So So let's open this back up and we're going to look. And this one has 2 screws. There's a screw here and a screw here. Now, some of these screw heads are usually half of a head, so you don't have to take them out. But this one, they're not half of a head, so I have to screw them out. The other thing that's really important is to get yourself a good set. This is a set of Bergeron screwdrivers. You can't have too good a set of screwdrivers, these jeweler screwdrivers. So I'm just going to, oh, that was a half head screw, that one. Okay, so it's got a half head one and another half head one. That's another clue to tell you that somebody's. Now this other screw is a full head, so it's got to come right out. So I screwed it out all the way, and then I'll grab it with the tweezers and I'll put it in. You can have a little dish. Now this other one you can see only has half a head, so it's smaller. So the next thing I want to do is pull the stem, make sure the stem has to be fully out. And these come out through the front. The screws are in the back, so the movement has to come out through the front. Now this watch is running, so we have to be a little bit careful. So I gently give it a little push, and it fell out. Now you can see, if we look here, you can see the stem is square. And the hole is square that the stem fits in. Okay, so we're gonna, I forgot to go by my list. So anyway, so we determined what type of case it was. Now I'm gonna put the my electronic machine on it. Now all pocket watches, or a very, very large percentage of them, are 18,000 beats. Now this is a special head that I bought for pocket watches. So really what I have to do is lay that on it. Now this one's not working very good. There's very little bit of swing in the escapement. It's probably only running maybe 60 degrees. Like it should have a lot more swing than that. This one has problems, and that's why I use it as a demonstrator. It's the error in this, see, it's jumping all over the place because the pocket watch says bad shape, but it gives you the beat error in milliseconds. Whereas a clock, because it's running a lot slower, it gives you the beat error in a percentage. If we go to the count, just see what it comes up to. My machine is set at 30 beats. So the first one that comes up is never very accurate. It looks like the second one's not very accurate. See, it's jumping all over the place. So that's another clue that this has a lot of problems. Anyway, it helps for setting the other thing that I might mention is the bench you work at. Now, my particular bench, if I can, it has an apron that pulls out. So if any parts roll off the table, so if this rolls off the table, it ends up in this tray. If you only want to spend half your life on the floor, a bench with an apron around your waist is good. If you want to spend 99% of your time on the floor looking for small parts, don't have an apron. And never have a place where you're working on clocks with carpet, because some of these parts are so small that you'll never, ever find them. And the other thing, when you're picking up parts with tweezers, if you get the least little bit of twist on it, it will flick off and go into no man's land, and you'll never, ever find it. I have had parts I've lost for a long time, and then sometimes I end up finding them. Like I don't clean around my workbench with a vacuum because it will suck up the piece and then it will be gone forever. So this is the movement. So the next thing we want to do is we want to put it in the holder. I enjoy this holder. It has 3 arms with a notch in it, and you can open it and adjust it for whatever you want. Now I have a whole tray, and this is another movement that a holder that will spin around and it will go big. So depending on what you're holding, I have a whole drawer full of these. Like these smaller type movement holders don't hold the bigger pocket watches very well. Now, when you're putting it in, if you put it in the movement with the hands on, make sure you put it in a spot where the hands aren't going to damage anything. Okay, there's the winding thing. I like to have that in the middle. And there's some other screws and things that are important to have. So I think before we do anything else, I'm going to pop the face off of it. So it's always a challenge when you're handling a running one to try to find a spot that you're not going to do any damage. Okay, so how does the face come off? Pocket watches have, it's usually a copper. They put a porcelain on top of copper, and there's usually screws. There's usually 3 of them that screw into the stud. So I need a small screwdriver, and make sure you pick the appropriate screwdriver for the screw that you're dealing with. You don't need to take them out. You only need to back them off. And there should be 3. And you can tell if they're the right ones because they're usually evenly spaced. So this should be the 3rd one. Okay, so the next thing I'll do is I'll gently stick the small screwdriver under the edge and just lightly give it a pry, because I want to make sure that there's nothing, that none of the screws are still holding it. Okay, so it's now loose, so I can lift it off. So you'll see the three studs that the little screw screwed in against. Now, I noticed there's something about this watch that, no, I thought it was a part missing. You're going to see a little tiny, thinner than paper, a washer. And what that does is this hour wheel is on there loose because it has to turn. And this is the 12-to-1 ratio gear down here. So that little washer keeps it from flopping around up against the face. A lot of times those little washers are missing. So I'm going to pop that gear off. After a while, you'll get so. And then the other thing up now, this little piece here, this is called a cannon pinion. It's on there with enough tension so that it doesn't slip. It's like the clutch in a clock. That has to be enough tension so you can adjust the time. So those fine tweezers aren't going to do the job. Some are tighter than others. There. So I used the tweezers and I pulled it off. It just tied up because that's the end of the minute arbor, the center wheel. So I'm going to put that aside. Now there's 2 screws holding the other gear in, and we won't take that apart quite yet. Now here you'll see the ratchet mechanism. Okay, so you see when I push the stem in, you can see that it's going back and forth between the 2 gears. And that's how it adjusts the time. And you can see if you look over here, there's different spring mechanisms that control where where it fits. We're not going to take all that apart today. It's reasonably self-explanatory and you shouldn't get into a lot of trouble. So now we're going to flip the movement back over. Just be careful, handle it, that you don't grab onto the side where the and it's always a good idea to wear gloves if you're handling a movement, so you don't leave fingerprints on it. But this is an old movement and it would be hard to show stuff with gloves on. So what I didn't do is I'm going to try winding it. I'm going to push it in. And if we wind it, you'll there's tension. So I know the spring is good. And you can, if you look right here, this piece right here, you'll see the little click, which is the ratchet that holds the. Now, if you wanted to let the power down earlier, there's actually a hole in here, and that pushes on that click. But you can't do that unless you're holding it, and you have to hold it, the pressure in against the spring, and make sure you put the screwdriver in flat because you have to push. And a lot of pocket watches, because the spring is pushing, you have to actually be slightly attempting to wind it to get the ratchet. Now, how am I going to? So I'm attempting to slightly wind it, and then that releases the ratchet. And I know you can't really see it, but I'm letting the spring down now. So we got all the power down. So when I'm pushing, make sure the blade is flat when you push it in the hole, because you're pushing on an arm. You can see I'm pushing there. So a lot of times that doesn't work. Just remember, you got to have this in. You got to be pushing it in tight into the winding position and slightly pressure to wind it. And then that unlocks the pressure off this cam so that you can let the power down. So we've let the power down. So the next thing we want to do is take the balance out. I'm going to put a little bit of power back in that because there's a test that I want to do. So I'll just give it a little bit of power. So there's one screw holding the balance cock on. Now this has a reasonably accurate adjuster. It's actually, the arm is through a wheel and then there's threads on it that gives you fine adjustments. So I pop the screw out. And now if you notice on the end, most of these pieces have a place to stick a screwdriver in because all these pieces are pinned. So I'll just gently stick the screwdriver in, and I just want to unlock the pins. And then I'm going to go in to the side, picking it up straight, and just gently wiggle a little bit, and it will come out. And I always put it upside down, and that's why you have the balance cup, the balance tack. I set it through the hole. I don't like letting them hang down. Now, if we look at this, we can actually see, you can see the roller jewel. You can see the end of the balance, and you see the pivot. I think you can just gently I'm being a little bit rougher with this than I should be, trying to get it at the right angles. Yeah, you can see the pivot there, and then you see the roller jewel down here. So I'm just going to set that to the side because that's the most delicate piece in your pocket watch. And the reason I put power in it, down here now we can see the escapement. And I like to have power in it, and I give that a touch. And if you just give it a light touch, you see it snap. And that tells me, if that snaps back and forth, that tells me that there's power coming from the spring barrel going down through the gears and getting to that. Now, some pocket watches have what's called a safety pinion. And I see this one says safety pinion. And what it is, this screw is a left-hand thread. So if the spring breaks, it actually unwinds the screw and doesn't cause damage to the pocket watch. So now if we go back to this and we snap and touch that, you see that there's no snap because we have no power. Now this particular pocket watch, the bridge is, it has two bridges. So this is your escape, that's 3. The escapement bridge is a single screw and it has a jewel, and that's all that's on that bridge is the escapement. But it comes out last. And then in this bridge, you have your escape wheel. And then there's a wheel here, and then you have your center wheel. And then this is the winding and the spring barrel. So let's pop off this bridge. Now this bridge has 2 screws, and there's no springs that will come flying at you. I like to keep the screws that was it. Now all the screws are the same pretty well, but I like to keep them where they belong. And if we look, now this one doesn't have a notch. So what I do is I just stick my tweezers in and give it the gentlest little nudge until it's loose. Again, these are pins. So I lift it straight up, no sideways movement, because you can see the pins, those index pins. Now this particular watch has jewels, and these are called set jewels. Now what set jewels are, I have a bag of set jewels here. Set jewels, the actual jewel material is set into a brass setting, except there's some jewels in this bag that are unset, and different pocket watches use different methods of so there. Now this red one here is an unset jewel. It's just a jewel. Now this jewel here is set. The jewel material is set into a brass ring. Now in this particular bridge, if we look at it, that brass ring is actually held in by 2 screws, which are very nice. They're easy to take out, easy to set in. The 2 screws hold them in. Now, in later years, there was another type of a jewel that actually was in with a clip. They were shock protected, and so these are set. Now, this was, I think, was a, what did we say? It was a 15 jewel. Now, or a 17 jewel. If it was a 19 jewel, there'd be a jewel in the center wheel. Mm-hmm. These are just a bunch of used jewels. There's people on eBay that you can buy parts from. There were a bunch of used jewels I bought that for fixing some clocks. So now we have this bridge that so I'll just set that to the side. But unfortunately, we can't take any of these wheels out yet because they're all under this other. So the next thing to do is to take out the spring barrel. There's slightly different so this I guess the spring barrel's on the other side. So you can see that the square shaft coming up from the spring barrel, and there's a square hole in this gear. So we'll just lay it aside. And And this other one, you can see that's the one with the left-hand thread, which is the safety pinion. So it looks like I'm tightening it, but I actually loosened it. There's no real indexing on any of this stuff. So you can see that there's a crown gear that when you slide the gear back and forth to wind it, well, you can see that it turns it. So the next, and this is your click. You can see the little tooth on it, that click. So let's pop this bridge off. So this bridge has 3 screws. If you turn the screw enough, you'll hear it, the last thread, you'll hear it snap. And that's when you know you're done, that you can take the screw out with the tweezers. Now, the other thing to be careful when you're taking these bridges off is if the pivots, the end of the pivots are real dirty, they'll catch in the bridge because the dirt will build up on the outside. And when you go to lift it up, it will want to take the gear with it. Now, this one has little notches in the side for to stick a screwdriver in to the other thing I got to take out is I got to take out the screw that held it in the case, because it goes down through also. So you can see the center wheel tried to lift up because it's so dirty. So it actually come out with, I'm just going to pop it back in. It's home. So this is the bridge for the spring barrel. So here's your gears for your crown gear that drives, and this is your spring barrel. So if we lift this center wheel out, and you can see it's long, and that's where the minute hand fits on. And then another wheel, you can actually see the size of the pivots. And then we have another one. Now, you can see where I'm putting them. I'm just lining them up on the edge. It's not the place to have a kid come by or somebody to come by and shake your hand when you're, and this is your escape wheel. Very, very delicate. And we can lift out the spring barrel. Oh, I see the cover is popped off of it. So there's the winding spring. As I said, this has a lot of problems. There's way too much oil on that. I just wipe it off with one of the tissues. Now, these springs, if you look carefully, you'll see a little square piece sticking up. And if we flip that over on the other side, you'll see a hole. And that's what the spring catches in. There isn't a pin like in a regular, if you try to compare it to a clock. But there's different mechanisms in different pocket watches that how they fasten it. So I got to make sure when I snap that cover in that it's in the right place. So I snap the cover back in, and and you can see the square piece that fit up through Now, we're not going to take the escapement out because we won't have the time today. We've already used up a lot of our hour. So you can see the escapement now. And there's two little guide pins that the escapement goes back and forth between. Those are actually, what do they call it? What's the word? When you rotate them, they're not centered, the pins. And there should be an adjustment. If we flip that over, yeah. Banking pins is what they're called. You'll see the two screws here, and that's an adjustment that you get into because sometimes pocket watches overbank or underbank, or it's not a normal adjustment that you would have to do unless somebody that was in there messing around. Now, this one is on a jewel, and you can see that it goes back and forth, but normally you take this screw out and take that bridge, and let's see, it will only go back and forth to the banking pins. So this has to go back together the same way it come out. And if you forget which is up and which is down, when you put that in, if I put it in the other way, the wheel wouldn't be the right height for the jewels. Now you can see, let's talk about jewels for a minute. Like the minimum you can have in a pocket watch is 7 jewels. Now, if we look at the balance, the balance always has a cap jewel on it, which is a jewel with no hole in it. It keeps the oil because that's the piece that's moving all the time. Again, it has the same 2 screws that holds the jewels in place. So that's actually 2 jewels here. Like it has a jewel with the hole, and then it has the cap jewel. And if we look at the bottom, it's the same. It has a cap jewel too. So that is 4 jewels in a pocket watch. Now, the 5th jewel, which is the odd jewel, is the roller jewel. And I showed that to you earlier, which is the jewel on the, so that's a little, it's kind of like a platform, and you can see the roller jewel over on the side. And that roller jewel is what fits and drives, it fits into the notch down in your escapement in here, and actually drives the escapement back and forth, because the hairspring gives it the power to return, and the escapement gives it the power to move one way, and the hairspring gives it the power to return, and that's why it goes back and forth. So that roller jewel fits into that notch. I don't know if you can see it real, and moves things back and forth. So let's, there's more pieces that one could take apart in this, and some of them are relatively straightforward, but again, time's not going to let us. So I'm going to put the spring barrel back in, and I'm going to put the escape wheel in. Now you need a very delicate touch to fit that into the bottom hole. It sets into the bottom hole. It wouldn't be a good thing to have a big party the night before if you were shaky when you're if you get into a Waltham size 18, they have what's called a full plate, and you have to put these all in upside down. They're a real nasty. So the last wheel to put in place is the center wheel, and you can see the center wheel is driven by the spring barrel. So that would be, if we look at it from a clock, so this would be T1, T2, T3, T4, and I usually call it E5 for escape wheel, or T5. So it has a standard amount of wheels that so now we're going to put the bridge back on. And again, these have index pins that line them up. And you say, well, where does it go? Well, the key I use is, you see this curved piece, and you know that fits over the winding mechanism. So the winding mechanism is here. So that's where I'm going to start. But you have to be so very gentle, because you don't want to damage any of the pivots. So it's a it looks like that. Now what I do to test, just like I would do on the clock, to test to see whether that's seated good. Now this only has one. I would lift it up and down, and it's not binding, so it looks like it's in the right place. So I'll set the screws in their home. And the other way, when you're working with this to hold stuff in place, use your tweezers to put some pressure down on it. And then just gently, no, I'm not tightening these screws. I'm just, as soon as I feel any pressure whatsoever, I'm stopping. All I want to do is get them in. I'm not using the screws to pry it down. I want to look at it to make sure I'm happy that everything is in place. Okay, so I'll grab a hold of that and just play in that. So that looks like, and nothing looks like it's binding. So I'll snug them down. Okay. So then the next bridge, now this one is more challenging because we got 3 pivots. The next bridge has 3 pivots. So I'll grab it by the side with my tweezers and try to put it down as straight as possible. Now, if you take a high-powered magnifier, you can actually look down through your jewel and see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick those 2 screws in. I'm not going to tighten them because I don't want this to slip sideways. It's not in the right place yet, but I don't want it to move around. So I'm only going to catch a thread, because if you try to pry this down, guaranteed you're going to bust a pivot. There, all I did was catch one thread. So now I'm going to try to sometimes if you hold your finger on it and give this a little turn, they'll cooperate. Now these aren't clean, so they're more challenging to fit in there. So I was playing with it and I felt it snap down. So I'm just gently, and I can see now, except my fingers are in the way, I can gently see stuff trying to turn. So now I'm going to, again, put pressure on the top of that so it doesn't move. And I'm going to turn the screws in just till I feel the slightest pressure. I'm not trying to use it as a wedge to pry it down. Everything feels free. So I'm going to put some pressure on the screws. And I'll also look on the side, and I can see I'm down tight anyway. Like I'm not jamming, because what you never want to do is jam any of those pivots. You always want to make sure that everything is free. Like, you know, like I'm going through great efforts, and that's why I'm turning on the center wheel, and I don't feel like there's any interference. So I snug them up, and I'm going to check. Everything still seems to be working. So let's we can put this gear back in, this crown wheel gear for the winding mechanism. Now, normally you take this all apart, you would clean it, but there's no way we could do that today. And remember, this is the left-hand thread with the safety pinion. And then we'll take and this is a square hole. And to get that to fit in, sometimes you have to take and move because the ratchet gear, you can see the tooth, and that's not lined up. So I'm going to turn the winding stem a little bit. There. You can see that it fit down over. Grab this little screw. So I've got that in place. Now I should be able to give it a little wind. And you see everything working. I only give it a turn and a half. So now I want to check back to my escapement to see if it snaps. And it does. See the escapement snap back and forth. So now I know I have power going down through my system. So we know we have 7 joules because on the end of the escapement, there's 2 joules. So we have 4 from the balance staff top and bottom because there's 2 joules and 2 cap joules. So we've got those. So there's 4 there. The 2 joules, the 2 cap joules, the roller joule makes 5, and the 2 joules on the end of the escapement, which makes 7. So now we have joules top and bottom that hold the escapement in place. We have 2 joules here, we have 2 joules here, and we have 2 joules here. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8. 8 and 7 makes 15. So it looks like, and it does say 15 joules. So that's our 15 joules. So if we went to 17 joules, the center wheel would be jouled, top and bottom. And if you went to 19 joules, sometimes the spring barrel. And once you get above that, they start putting cap joules on top of other joules. So 17 to 19 joules is a good movement. The cap joules just keeps dirt out and keeps oil because they can have oil underneath the cap joule. And that's kind of what it does. And it also gives the end of the pivot something to run against because it adjusts and controls the end play in the movement. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to put the balance back in. Now, I like to have a little bit of power, so I'm going to give it a little bit more power. So I will grab that with my tweezers on the side. Now, when to know whether a pocket watch is in beat, because to put a pocket watch in beat, what you're doing is you're actually turning that hairspring, because if you look where the roller joule is, when there's no power in the pocket watch, that roller joule should hold the escapement dead center between these 2 banking pins. That's how you know if it's in beat. So to adjust the beat, what you have to do is actually twist that hairspring on the shaft. Now, it has a split collet on the hairspring, so you can actually stick a little tool in there and rotate it slightly. So when you're putting it back in the movement, the reason I like a little bit of power, because it seems to help me. So I know where the roller joule is, and I know where my balance is. The escapement is closest to me against that banking pin. So I'm going to slide that under, and I can actually see the roller jewel. So I hope I got it in the right place. So I'm just gently coaxing it. Now my balance looks like it's sitting cockeyed. So you notice me twisting it. I want to see, and I don't get much movement. So because what I'm doing is I'm looking down inside and I'm looking for the roller jewel to see whether it's in the notch. And it is, but I don't have, so I'm at the point now where I want to put the screw in because I'm real, it's close, but again, I'm not going to use the screw as a wedge. So I'm going to hold it with my tweezers while now, if this movement would be clean, it would have taken off moving. Okay, so when I twist it, it looks like it's trying to flow, but because it's so dirty, I suspect there's not enough power in the spring because I didn't give it. So I'm going to tighten that screw down a little bit more. And I always keep checking, and I'm looking in there to see whether or not the balance, the escapement is rocking back and forth. Now you can't see it. That could be why it wasn't. Now, again, if you look, this one has a notch to put a screwdriver in. So, but you can't twist or pry anything. It's just there to break the pins. So let me attempt this again. Anyway, I can't waste any more time on that. I want to get over, I'm going to pop that out and we'll do the face. So the next thing we have to do is put our cannon pinion back on. And one of the tests that I do, which I didn't do, is I always try the minute hand. I try to see if there's any tension, because if the cannon pinion is loose, the minute hand will flop around. And I actually seen that on a couple pocket watches. It took nothing to move the minute hand, and then the special tool for tightening a cannon pinion. There's actually a wedge. I don't think you can see it, but there's actually a wedge in the side, and you put it in a special tool to so that cannon, you have to be careful when you're putting the cannon pinion back on that the teeth mesh. So I got my heavy tweezers here. So what I will do is I can put my thing in, and I'm not down deep enough yet, but I can line the teeth up better. There. I don't know, you didn't hear the snap, but it snapped in place. So now we can actually see it. We can see it turning. So I'll put my hour gear on. Again, the gears have to mesh up properly. I'll put my little washer back on. And we know this was a Hunter case. If you say, well, where does the face go? We know it was a Hunter case, so it fits. So we look for the winding hole, because we know that winding hole was 3 o'clock. So I found the winding hole on the side. So we know that's the 3 o'clock position. So there should be a pinhole with a screw, because you can actually see them. You see they're tapered, and if we look on the outside, it's the screw hole. So it fit in quite nicely. So the next thing to do is screw in those little screws on the studs. Now you don't need 100 pounds of torque on these. They just need to be set. So now we have that. So I'm going to flip it back over, and I'm going to try one more time to put the balance in. There, now I can see it work. Well, actually, the clock is working now. So to put the hands on, the first thing that goes on is the hour hand. So you put it over the hole, and I use my finger on the tweezers and put some downward pressure, and it kind of fits. So the next thing we want to do is, I always use 12 and 6. So I'm going to use the winding, because I'm going to set it at exactly 6 o'clock. So there, now I've got it at exactly 6 o'clock. So the next thing I'm going to put on is the minute hand. And remember, I said the minute hand always has a curve. So I want to get that as close to 12 o'clock as I can. There, it's snapped in place. So the next thing I want to do is I have to check that there's and if we look closely, you can see that the two hands aren't binding. And the other thing that you have to be careful of is to make sure that the hands don't rub on the glass. So I'll move this stuff out of the way, and that second hand, so I've got it started, and I'm just going to give it a little push down, and you can see it running. So to put it back in the case, we have to make sure the stem is pulled, and we've got a running watch, which probably isn't real good, but for demonstration purposes, so we got to get the front, because it goes in from the front, and the stem has to be pulled. So we'll line it up, and then it kind of falls back in. Be careful when you're around it, because you don't want to bend any of the hands. So there we go. We have the watch is running. Now, I didn't tell you about, I didn't tell you about the little brush. Now, if you want to check, like if it's moving, you can actually check it with this little hair. It's just a paintbrush, and to see whether, and you can't do any damage. But if you get poking around with tweezers, you can cause damage to check to see if the balance is good. Or so, you'll develop your own techniques, and it's not a sport for people who shake, unfortunately. Yeah. Because as you can see, some of that stuff is fairly delicate, but hopefully you learned a little bit, and get some old movements. That's what I did. And the best place is at a pawn shop, because they're only interested in the gold. And I've bought movements for $20, $30, nice big movements that were in good shape. They just had no case. So, you'll, and those are the ones to experiment with. And I've broken a couple balance staff pivots years ago. It's a fact of life, and I'd almost guarantee everybody that started working on pocket watches did. They're a very unforgiving piece. Yes, this one is full of cracks. you actually, if I get the right angle here on my tweezers, you look up here, you see all the cracks?
Hairline
this
cracks, yeah. There's nothing.
Yeah, the porcelain is plated on copper. Now, what some people do is you can use different cleaners, because the reason you're seeing that crack is because of dirt. Now, I think, now Brian can talk more to this, but I think they actually use like polydent cleaners, some of those there pills for cleaning dentures and stuff, and that will get in there and actually eat out all that black, which is dirt. And but most of these old watches like that, that's probably cracks from being dropped. And it's hard to get a dial in perfect shape.
The reason why I point that out is because it has a lot of importance in determining the value of a pocket watch.
Yes, it does. There's a lot of factors that there's just some pocket watches that are much more desirable than others. Not that they're better quality, but now I think there's called a Montgomery dial, but like that's an area that I'm not very well versed in. Brian knows all that stuff. He studied that stuff. I'm more into the mechanical side of clocks and watches instead of the history. But for instance, now if we look at this, if we look at this one, this is a desirable dial. Now let me screw the face off so you can see it. This is a Waltham. I think it's a Crescent Street. Yeah. So it has a beautiful dial on it. All the seconds are indicated individually. There's red and black. I don't know why that's not showing up. Huh. The red numbers aren't showing up. Like every fifth one is a red one. They're just showing up darker, but they should be red. Oh, that's interesting. And it's got 24-hour time on it. It's a double sunk dial. Brian, what's this? Is this a Montgomery dial?
Yes.
But the experts wouldn't call it a Montgomery dial. They called it a Montgomery type dial. A Montgomery dial doesn't have the 24 hours on it. And okay. Montgomery dial always has the 6, which that one does. But that dial is probably worth as much as the watch because it's so scarce.
Yeah. Now it has a few hairline cracks.
It doesn't matter.
They're not showing up, but that's the whole science in itself, pricing pocket watches. And usually when I buy, like I have probably 80 pocket watches in my collection. Some of them, like the gold ones, unfortunately, I had to pay a lot of money for. But like I've bought really nice 15 and 17 jewel Waltham pocket watches. They didn't work, but I gave them a quick check to make sure that the balances and some of that stuff, the spring was good, the balance. So I think I paid one I paid $40 for and one I paid $50 for. I brought it home and in a few hours it was working. It was just dirty. And you'll find that in a lot of pocket watches. It's usually just dirt or old oil that keeps them from working. So